So I kind of want to warm you up a little bit. I want to start high level with mentorship. And who has mentored you? How has mentorship played a role in your career?
It's interesting because mentorship, can be different things for different people. I grew up working in my former father-in-law's restaurant, both a delicatessen and a steakhouse, in my teenage years in high school, and I really learned the core level of the restaurant business, being mentored by him in terms of what makes a difference: food costs, labor, treating your customers right, experience, and that, of course, led me to say I would never be in the restaurant business, and swore to it. And here we are as the 25th largest restaurant company in the U.S.
I know it is insane. You're a business guy and you're a money guy and you're a restaurant guy too, but I feel like you could have gone so many different directions. What actually drew you to the restaurant industry?
Well, again, I started in real estate finance, doing all
Right.
kinds of loan business activity. I owned a couple of banks, and we bought loans from the government, and had a big mortgage finance company. But one of the investments that was sort of on the side was helping finance the buyout of Fatburger from a group of celebrities in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
As we did that, and because I knew the restaurant business from growing up, I thought about how scalable that business was on a franchise model, and that led me to invest more and to modify my approach, and then start to really focus in on it as to how could I scale this business.
And what did you see from like an outsider's perspective? I mean, obviously you had worked as a line level employee, but I mean, objectively, like you look at the industry from the outside and you say, this is an industry that just can't seem to make money. I mean, most low margin industries are high volume, but like the restaurant industry is so special in that it is like low volume and low margin. It's okay to make 2% on a billion. It's a little different when you're making a million.
So what's interesting about the restaurant industry is there's so many failures. And when you find brands that have staying power, Fatburger's been around over 75 years today, and we've owned it for 20 years. So it was over 50 years when we bought it. When you see brands with staying power, then you really want to dig in and say, how can I scale it? When you can show that a brand can open and maintain 5 or more locations in 5 or more different markets, now you've got something that's really franchisable and scalable, because consumers in different areas love it, and it's sustainable. And so then you can kind of lean into it. And the best way to scale a business is to franchise it, because then you're using other people's capital to grow the overall business, not trying to raise it all yourself.
Well, let's talk about Fatburger as like a microcosm, right? So you look at Fatburger, you saw, I would assume, I mean, they had many locations. It had been around a long time, but it was largely stratified. It wasn't, I mean, I was in LA 20 years ago. It wasn't this finely tuned machine across all locations. What was your unfair advantage? Did you go in and you were like, this place just needs systems?
So when I bought the Fatburger brand in 2003, there were 40 locations, half franchised, half company-owned stores, scattered between Los Angeles and Las Vegas for the most part, a few maybe in Arizona also. And what they really had going for them was outstanding food. The burger would beat everyone else in every competition all the time. And that really reminded me to not change anything in terms of the recipe, stick to what's working for consumers, and figure out how to scale the business and make sure that the operators knew how to make money. Being a finance guy in the restaurant industry, and understanding on the franchise side of things that the franchisee is really the customer, not just the guy eating the burgers,
Right.
shakes, and fries. So the franchisee's got to know how to make money. He's got to have margin. He's got to have purchasing power. He's got to stick to the recipe. I mean, if you join a franchise system, you're doing that because they've already figured out the playbook. You just have to
Sure.
follow it. And you're not reinventing the wheel, which is why there's so many failures. And, in the restaurant business, customers want consistency. Even in fine dining, they want consistency. And so if you have a franchise system that you can promote consistency, which Fatburger needed a little bit of help with, and you can start to scale it and grow it into different markets to beef up your overall presence, then you're on your road to success.
Let's talk about consistency because you look at all of your brands and like it's not about innovation. When you talk to the independent restaurateur, they prize innovation, right? Myself included. Everybody wants to talk about like the new cool thing they're doing. But customers, they prize consistency, right? That's what they're looking for in a brand. So how does, like, we'll just use Fatburger as an example because you've had it for so long. How does it maintain relevance through consistency and not innovation.
Everyone wants to be in the restaurant business. Everyone thinks they're an artist and they want
Sure,
to reinvent the
sure.
wheel all the time. And that's just not the way to grow and scale your business. Consistency is what it's all about. And so if you have a recipe that works, which was developed in our case in the late 1940s by the founder, Levi Yancey, and there was a certain blend of beef and a certain cut of the steer and all those things, then you stick to that and you don't mess with it. There's always some technology that comes into play when things change a little bit, but not a lot. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is not change the dynamics of the menu in terms of the ingredients. You may add things like a veggie burger, or in this day and age, an Impossible Burger, or something like that. You may have a sweet potato fry in addition to your regular skinny fries or fat fries or onion rings that are homemade. You can add a few things here and there to expand your memo or mix it up a little bit. Your menu, not your memo. You can expand your menu and make it a little bit different for customers, just to have some diversity when they come in. But really sticking to what you're good at and scaling that is critical. That you can always have things that are interesting, like different flavored milkshakes, or a special of some kind, like a Thousand Island burger or a barbecue burger or whatever. But the core products, you got to stick to it, and that's what you really lean in, and that's also where you get your margin.
You've scaled primarily through mergers and acquisitions. And that being the case, I'm sure that there's a formula, right? Like there is, A plus B equals a valuable company worth acquiring. What are those essential elements that establish brand value for you when you look to acquire a brand?
So, I'm primarily a franchisor. We have 2,300 restaurants today in the Fat Brand system that are open or under construction, and we've sold another 1,100. So we have a huge pipeline to grow our business organically, in addition to any new acquisitions that we make, and that's based upon going out to the market and taking our concepts and selling them to existing franchisees and to new franchisees. And first and foremost, you've got to have good unit level economics. If the businesses make money, then franchise operators will want to take them under their belt and run with them, just because it's really a proven way or path to success. So I think that that's critical. You have to have good unit economics. And then as you're looking at the different categories of business, for us, we started out in the fast casual space with Fatburger. We bought Buffalo in 2003. We bought Buffalo's Cafe in 2011. So we had a good 8 years of work on the Fatburger brand to make sure we knew what we were doing. And then we felt like our franchisees were ready to take on more units in their markets of a different concept, so they could expand a little bit. And it also gave us an entree into the casual dining space.
Mm-hmm.
So once we were in the casual dining space, then we looked at how Fat Brands got created, which was really, okay, now we own 2 or 3 brands. That was Fatburger, Buffalo's Cafe, and Buffalo's Express, which is kind of like a Wingstop. And we thought, okay, let's take this thing public. And we bought Ponderosa and Bonanza, the steakhouse chain, at that time. And that put us into a different category, which is the buffets, or the full casual dining space, and all you can eat buffets. And so now we were up on our feet, and then it was sort of, how do we backfill the different categories? And we bought Elevation Burger, we bought Hurricane Grill and Wings, which each fit into the categories we were already in, right? We were already in the burger category, we're already in the casual dining wings themed category. And so we just kept building on those categories, and bought Johnny Rockets during COVID as the first acquisition. And then we really leaned into it as we went on through COVID, buying the Global Franchise Group, which had Round Table Pizza and all the cookies and ice cream brands, Marble Slab Creamery, Great American Cookie. And then we bought a Mediterranean concept called Yala. We bought Twin Peaks, the sports bar concept. And by the time we looked in the rearview mirror, we were giant. We were number 25, and it had been a very busy year and a half, 2 years, while a lot of guys were hiding under their coffee table from COVID.
And let's go back to unit economics for a minute, because you said that these individual brands, they have to have solid unit economics, but define that for me, because I can tell you myself, is someone that spent 2 decades as a restaurateur and has now worked through coaching and consulting across over 100 different restaurants. I define good differently today than I did 20 years ago, So how do you define good unit economics? What do you think is strong?
You bet. There's a lot to be said for simple economics instead of complicated economics. When look in a casual dining space, you might look for a 10% margin. You might do $2 million in average unit volume in your restaurant, and you make 10%. That's 200 grand. That's pretty good. Those restaurants cost $1 million, million and a quarter to build today. They used to cost quite a bit less before inflation. But in the fast casual space, you probably have a 15% margin, but it's on a slightly lower average unit volume. It's a million, 3 million, 4 million, 5, something like that. So anywhere in that range, you just want to have a healthy margin so you have some cushion, and you really have to have high top line sales. You can't really build a foundation of success on $500,000 average unit volumes in your restaurants. There's just not enough cushion in there to pay your manager, make some money yourself, weather a storm of some kind that comes through. And so, I like to see concepts with higher average unit volumes. The far end of that spectrum is something like our Twin Peaks brand, which can do anywhere from $6 to $14 million in a store.
Right.
And as you get up to that $6 million level, you're up to the 18-19% restaurant level margin, and you keep going from there up into the 20s. So we all know as top line grows in the restaurant space, your margin grows because your fixed costs are covered. And so I think you want to look at concepts where you have some room or white space to grow your business, grow your top line, and increase your margin. That's how you really put money in the bank.
There seems to be a shortage. I mean, God, of a lot of things, right? But more than anything, it's leadership, right? There's a leadership vacuum in the industry at large. And you're a man that works with hundreds, if not thousands of leaders, right? Each one of these franchisees themselves is a leader. And I'm sure you've had many that work out and a few that haven't. And so over time, are you able to clearly define what are the qualities of a great franchisee? Because I feel like that would resonate with what makes a great general manager or what makes a great independent restaurateur.
Sure. I think great franchisees are guys who truly treat their business as their own. They're in the details, they're in the weeds, they understand their numbers. You just can't be in the restaurant industry and not know your numbers because it'll eat you alive. So what's critical is we coach our franchisees. They're our business partner. They really are the customer because they're the ones that pay us a royalty every week. Mm-hmm. It's not really the guy, eating the burger, shake, or fries. It's the franchisee. And we're coaching them on their numbers. Know your numbers constantly. Be aware of them. Be in your restaurants. Know your customers. Listen to them. Listen to your team members, because that's the best feedback you're going to get. And I think when you look at how they deal with adversity, because they always have, and everyone in the restaurant industry has adversity come and go with all the different employees and the different dynamics of customers and the service modules today with delivery and all that stuff. So I think when you're looking for someone who's ready to adapt their business to the changing times, but trying to keep the concept a stable, known quantity to customers. And, it's pretty easy to see the non-resident owner versus the resident owner. Sure. When you have a chat with them and you talk about their numbers, you kind of learn right away which guy has his finger on the pulse and which guy is depending on his manager and he really has no idea what's going on. And there's other things you can do, like if he already has a restaurant, you spend a little bit of time in his existing restaurant, even if it's a different concept. How clean is the kitchen? How clean are the employees? How clean is the dining room? What's his level of interaction with the customers or the employees? Like, does he have some way to connect with your employees? Because that's how you retain employees, right? You got to have a connection with them. You don't just make them clock in and clock out. You got to know who they are.
In terms of strategy, have you guys paid more attention in recent years, just because of all of the economic influences that are out there, to catering, to events in the quick service and casual spaces?
So it's interesting. We really leaned into non-traditional venues over the last couple of years. We added a whole team focused on non-traditional venues. That could be coliseums or stadiums. It could be airports, casinos, train stations, universities, and amusement parks. And that's been for some of our brands. That's very, very low-hanging fruit, like Frappr or Johnny Rockets, the pretzel brands, ice cream, cookies, stuff like that. That's where you can sell a lot of that product, and it's an impulse buy, or it's quick serve in one fashion or another. So that's really worked. I don't think special venues are great for casual dining or for the sports bars. I mean, once in a while, a sports bar will work in an airport or in a venue, but it's a lot of top line sales that you need, and you got to have a lot of throughput, and then you need a lot of real estate, and sometimes those special venues don't have the real estate. But absolutely, I think it's a good focus point, and it's low-hanging fruit if you have the right brand that can apply to that kind of venue.
And then you've really worked to stay in your lane, right? Quick service, casual dining. You haven't gotten into like full service. You haven't gotten into fine dining. In your mind, what are the strategic advantages of staying in those tiers versus others?
Well, I think it's really hard to franchise fine dining or some of the very ethnic brands like a complicated sushi delivery model, because to get consistency across your different locations and your states or countries. We're in 40 different countries around the world, and almost every state. And so I think the fine dining element is just more difficult to get an owner operator to have that passion and that consistency in every single market for it to be the same. Some guys do it well, but it's hard. The extreme for us has been the polished casual dining segment, like the sports bars, like Twin Peaks or Smoky Bones, where they've replicated it. But we've decided to not really go any further than that in terms of franchising, because it's just hard.
Well, it's hard. It seems like it's hard everywhere right now. I mean, you entered the space in 2017. Inflation is in a very different place. Minimum wage is in a very different place. And you're in, I mean, like you said, every state in the country. So we flashed to Louisiana, where I think they're paying like $3 and change for a tipped employee. Or you can go to San Francisco and pay that same body $22 an hour. I mean, how, when we get into, again, unit economics, but it's scale, like how do you make it make sense everywhere? Or does it just not make sense in some markets?
Well, I think that there are markets you're going to lean into, which are the markets that have better unit level economics, better labor cost, consistent customer demand. And we've done really well in Texas and in Florida, where you do have tip credit. California, the cost is just higher. So if you're going to do business in those markets, the customer has to know they're going to pay for it. The operator simply doesn't have the margin to absorb that kind of labor without taking price. And so, you want the concepts where you have some elasticity of demand, and the customer understands that they're going to pay more for different things, and that's the only way it works. If you have a price point where you get ahead of yourself and consumer demand isn't there at those price points necessary to pay that labor, then you're just out of business. So I think I say often that the consumers, who are the voters, must have known what they were doing when they elected certain people to vote for what's going to be a $25 minimum wage in not too long. And somebody's got to pay for it. And I don't know what they're thinking, but they're the ones who are going to be paying for it.
I think you bring up a great point. And I think in our industry, especially again, when you look on the independent level, you see that like we are public servants, right? So nobody wants to charge $28 for a hamburger, but you don't seem like a guy that's going to apologize for charging what you need to make the money that you need to make, which makes you an outlier in this industry, I would argue. Yes?
Yeah. So you have to coach your franchisees to maintain their margin. If they don't maintain their margin, they're going to be out of business. And when you find an independent who says, I just can't raise that price, I'm afraid to raise that price, what ends up happening is a year or two later, he's lost so much money, he can't stay in business. The chain operators have been coached presumably by their franchisors to maintain your margin. Even if you lose some sales, you've got to make money on the sales that you do make. And I think it's really important. But someone's going to pay for it here, and if you don't stay in business, what good is that? And just to be clear here, the thought that the rising minimum wage only applies to chains is totally crazy, right? Because the employees at the independents are going to say, why am I going to stay here and make $15 or $18 an hour when the chain down the street's paying $20 or $22 an hour? I'm going to go over there. So the independent's got to raise his wage to be competitive. So it really affects everyone in that way. And if they don't take price, then they're going to just get crushed on their margin.
And do you you have like 1 million restaurants under your belt. When you take the long view, do you see that the train's going to come off the tracks at some point? At some point, do we butt up against price elasticity?
Yeah, I think we're there already in terms of taking price. I think the consumer is just up to their chin in how much price they can take, and make their paycheck work. We've seen everyone trade down in category from fine dining to casual dining to fast casual to QSR. And what we've seen in recent times is the QSR customer saying, I don't have anywhere to trade down to. I'm already at the bottom here. I'm just going to lower my frequency. I can't go as often. I'm going to have to bring a turkey sandwich from home. And that's the reality of today. And, you never see a restaurant operator lower price. When does that ever happen? Once you get your customer in that mode, you may have some fluctuations in commodity prices, and you can offer a bucket of wings at a slightly lower price on a temporary basis, but it really never comes down. So we're definitely jammed up in the upper right quadrant here of price, and you're trying to add value for your customer because you've got to maintain loyalty and reward. You can't expect the customer to say, oh, it's okay, I'll pay no matter what I have to pay, just because your costs went up. They'll do it, but they're going to reduce their frequency if you don't give them some value. So you got to give them a reason to come back.
And is that value wrapped up in price? I mean, when you look at like Twin Peaks as a model, I think it's a great example. And like then we look at Applebee's and TGI Fridays and Chili's that are offering, what is it, like 40 appetizers for a nickel at this point. Is the goal to, I guess, change how consumers perceive value so that it's not a race to the bottom?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Twin Peaks has a barbell pricing system where we have cheap beers and a lot of good sports to watch, and the food's great. Scratch Kitchen. We also have high end tequilas, whiskeys, scotches, things like that can be $35 a pour, versus a beer that's $5. So you have something for everyone, so that there's a way for them to be in the market and be in your restaurant. And whether you're having a platter of nachos that's reasonably priced versus a steak or a piece of salmon or something, we can get you either way and take care of you. I think that's where you show value rather than just moving everybody to the high end and assuming that everyone can afford that.
And then as it relates to marketing, I mean, in being a part either as a franchisor, or an active partner in restaurants, like you guys have opened so many locations. What have you learned about go to market and how to effectively open a restaurant in a new area?
Well, it takes some pre-marketing for sure. In some time periods or cycles, marketing wasn't necessary at all. The economy was strong. Customers are coming into your restaurants. They're aware of your brand, and you just can't move the needle enough to be worth spending that incremental dollar on more marketing. It wasn't doing anything. That's not right now. Right now, you need to be spending money on marketing because you've got to differentiate yourself, define your value, and deliver that guest experience. I think when you go into a market today, you have to get the temperature read on how much brand awareness do you have. If you have brand awareness, then you're in a good spot, right? Because customers already know about you. They just need to know that you're here. If they've never heard of you and they are now just learning that you're here, you've got a lot more wood to chop, and you're going to have to promote that and spend marketing dollars to do that. So you really have to know the market you're going into and understand the brand awareness of your brand that you're going to open.
Can we take a small detour and talk about money for a little bit? You seem, again, like you just seem to have, and you meet people like this in your life, and it can be transformative. You seem like a guy that understands money on a deep level and like the way it flows, how to create wealth, how to create value. When you look at the restaurant industry, like what lens do you look at it through from that perspective?
Well, being a finance guy in the restaurant industry, the good thing is I'm not an artist, right? I'm not trying to create something where I've fallen in love with my product and forgotten to figure out how to make money. So I think that's really critical. And it's sort of like the guy that leases a location in the middle of Main and Main Street or Times Square, and they're going to pay some crazy amount of rent just so everyone sees their brand. That's a very expensive way to grow your business, right? Because you're losing money hand over fist just to promote your brand. So I'm not in favor of that. And I tend to really want to make sure that franchisees understand the economics of a store they're going to build, and they understand the cost of money. They understand what their cash flow is. Those are things that you got to get right from the beginning. You need to make sure you have enough liquidity when you open a restaurant that you can cover your costs. You may not make money out of the gate, so you got to be ready, to feed that. And so I think looking at the restaurant industry with a financial lens just helps ensure that you're going to be successful. Of course, location, right? You got to have a good location or nothing works. But if you have a decent location and you have a decent concept, now you're 2/3 of the way there.
What are the areas of opportunity that you see in the industry that just aren't for you, but they're definitely opportunities out there?
Well, there's always food technology, which is interesting, but it's very capital intensive. It's not something that we've wanted to dive into. And there's generally, restaurant technology. So, I think that the tech companies should raise money and reward their investors by selling us technology. I don't want to be the one developing technology. That's not our core business. Same thing with food technology, like the plant-based proteins, things like that. That's a very capital-intensive business. But once you've got the product, we're going to offer it, and customers like it. We're going to buy more of it. So I think those are interesting. I do think as you've watched the all the third-party apps get developed and rolled out, that's another example for whether it's third-party delivery or some other app that the technology changes so fast that in the old days, everybody would make their own delivery app and you'd spend $50,000 or $100,000 for your delivery app. And 6 months later, it'd be completely outdated. You'd have to throw it out and start all over again. So it's really, to understand what you are. If you're a restaurant providing food and service and quality, then keep doing that and stick to that. Don't spend money on things that you can buy from somebody else as a commodity like product. And I think that's, where I see the opportunity today is really to look to expand your business to customers in markets that want your product rather than try to innovate on the technology side. That's a really expensive endeavor.
Do you consider yourself a restaurateur? I interviewed Jeff Finster for the show. He owns a multi-unit Healthy Bowl concept, but then he also owns the construction company that does it. He's got a franchise model as well. And I asked him a question. I said, from your perspective as a restaurateur, and he goes, I'm not a restaurateur. That's not what I do. I'm an entrepreneur that is in the restaurant space. How do you see yourself?
Well, we're definitely in the franchising business, first and foremost, and it's in the restaurant space by design, but it could be in the veterinary space or the or the dry cleaning space. It's really about making sure the product you offer your franchisees is one where they can make money, because if they make money, they're going to build more stores and pay you more royalties. And so I think that's first and foremost. Of course, growing up in the restaurant industry gives me some experience. Having been now an operator for 20 years in the restaurant space gives you experience. And it's a space that has tremendous white space, and also it's gigantic in terms of total size, right? We will do by ourselves almost $2.5 billion in sales this year. So there's a lot of room to grow there versus some micro industries that just aren't big enough to really scale. But I definitely consider myself a restaurateur and a franchisor, both.
Were you ready to scale to that level? I mean, first of all, is anybody? But when you talk about $2 billion in sales under management, under your purview, I mean, my God, Andy. And I mean, so much of that growth happened in the last several years. How did you change in order to meet the expectations of the new challenges?
So creating Frappr in 2016, taking it public in 2017, having bought our first brand Frappr in 2003. I mean, it's taken a long time. It's taken longer than I wanted. It took longer to scale when we went public, and the fact that COVID hit and that slowed us down to some extent. And also it became a huge opportunity where people were selling things that we found, at prices that made sense for a change, and we were able to access the capital markets. So, I think it forces you to step up and do the things that, need to be done. And, I think that's just part of growing as an entrepreneur and growing in business, is forcing yourself to the next level. And, I sort of view the world as, how do you get on first base? How do you get on second base? How do you steal third base, rather than how do you hit a home run? The home runs happen on their own. You really need to move from base to base. And that's just maintaining flexibility and reevaluating your strategy each time you get to the next base, so you can figure out, how to get all the way around and back to home plate.
Your wife is successful in her own right. What have you learned from her through this process?
Yeah, Jessica, my wife's been, interesting to watch her develop several different nonprofit associations, and she also leads our non-traditional sales effort at Fat Brands. And she was an experienced corporate salesperson with a long career at American Express and Federal Express and places like that before that. So she worked on really big accounts. And what I learned from her was the patience and tenacity that was necessary for those non-traditional venues, because they're very long lead times, right? Normally, commission salespeople need to live hand to mouth. And so they got to close the sale and move on to the next one. But when you're in the non-traditional world, it can take a year or two to get a location open in an amusement park or a university or a stadium. And when you have that tenacity and you just keep pecking away at it, it really builds up a foundation. And the same is true in the nonprofit forum, where she started the Fat Brands Foundation, which is a charitable organization where the company and vendors and employees all donate to the foundation, and then they make grants to businesses in markets where we have restaurants of all different types, and they give away all of their money every year. Fat Brands supports the overhead of the foundation, but it's really interesting to see everyone come together and give back to those communities and create a vehicle where everyone can participate. And they treat it very seriously. They have a board of directors. They vet all these applications for grants, and they're very charitable to anyone who applies that can qualify. And so I think it's a great experience to see people give back.
I'm hoping that I don't depress myself with your answer to this question, but like, what are your goals for the rest of 2024 and beyond?
This is an interesting time in the economy, right? I certainly want to see the election behind us, interest rates coming down, and consumers, showing some sign of relief in their wallet, and that's important. For us, we've talked about taking one of our brands public. We've announced that before. Hopefully, that gets done sometime in the next few quarters. Not sure when, but hopefully it does. Also, as we look at the M&A front, there are opportunities out there left and right now. A lot of them are distressed. I'm not a big fan of distressed opportunities because it takes up so much time to turn them around. I'd rather pay more for a brand with wind at its back that's got growth and momentum than pay less and do a big turnaround, which is just a very long grind. So I see a lot of M&A opportunities. I see some capital markets opportunities. Those are all goals, right now that I'm focused on.
What should we steal from you? For the folks listening, the independent restaurant owners and operators that are looking to improve, what are the tactics, tools, and strategies that have served you well?
I think you really need to have the guts to persevere. So if you find yourself knocked down on the canvas, get back up and get in the ring and keep at it. Realize if something's not working that you need to change it. Don't talk yourself into going down the same path that didn't work before and convincing yourself, that it's going to be different somehow. And you got to know your numbers every single day, because that's what makes, the world turn here. You got to have the cash flow to make your business work.
Last question for you. The restaurant industry is filled with all of these unspoken rules and traditions about how things should be done. How would you like to see our industry turn the tables to create a better future for all of us?
I think education for operators and owners is important. I think it's a good way to give back. I think if the industry there's so many lessons from so many operators that have been through so many different challenges, and to really memorialize that and communicate that, I think would be really beneficial. It's probably something the NRA could lean into, or some of the state restaurant associations. But trying to take those lessons from experienced operators and communicate that to the newer guys in the market just will save them a lot of pain.
We did it, Andy. We knocked it out the park.